Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us for this preview of Sunday Night Soccer, St. Louis City against the Portland Timbers. We've got a jam-packed show for you where I'll run down everything there is to know about these two sides heading into match week 22 for St. Louis, match week 23 overall. And for the Timbers, it's their 21st match as well. Before we get into the preview, though, let's run through a little bit of news that happened this week, namely the big news that St. Louis City released, which was the announcement of Rasmus Alm being put on the season-ending injury list. What does this mean for Alm? What does this mean for St. Louis City? Well, for Rasmus Alm, it's pretty clear. He's shut down for the rest of the season. This has been a long time coming. This has been a tough battle, and Rasmus Alm himself even announced on Instagram that it's related to an issue he's been dealing with for over 2 years now, just unable to right the ship. And this is a moment that David Critchley alluded to midweek, where he's talking about Alm not being able to get going, seeing the progress he's making on the field, and Critchley having that feedback of let's just shut it down, let's get yourself right, and then you can go on with your career, kind of however that may seem. Critchley was very much about on the field, what progress Alm was making on the field. Unfortunately for Rasmus Alm, this could be the end of his career with St. Louis City SC. His contract is up at the end of this season. He has an option for next year. He's not making a ton of money compared to a lot of our high dollar players. He's making $343,925 guaranteed for his compensation each year. We'll have to have that conversation at the end of the year to see how his progression goes now that he's shutting himself down from on-field activities for City for the season. For the club, though, St. Louis City now has 2 open senior roster slots, 2 open supplemental slots, and 2 open international slots. They do receive relief for Rasmus Alm in being able to replace him on the senior roster slot. So now that he is off the roster on the season-ending injury list, we have an additional roster slot. That gives us 2 senior roster slots in total. So from a really quick reflection on what St. Louis City's roster looks like and what we have available going into the transfer window, after the Alm announcement, we currently have 2 designated players and 2 U22s on our roster, being Hartl and Klaus, with Durkin and JGR being the U22s. We are in the U22 model of roster construction, meaning currently we can have 2 DPs and 4 U22s, in addition to getting $2 million in GAM for the year. But we can switch that during the summer transfer window, which opens on July 24th. So we could switch to the DP model that looks at having 3 designated players with 3 U22s, in which case we could fill both of those open senior roster slots with 1 DP and 1 U22, or with 2 U22s, depending on how St. Louis wants to work. We also have a boatload of GAM to play with, $1.988 million in GAM as of May 1st to work with going into this transfer window. So the only specific nuance that applies to Rasmus Alm with the season-ending injury, outside of these big things to know, is that the replacement player for Alm on the roster can only hit the cap up to Alm's guaranteed compensation, $343,925. That's why that's important. So the salary and acquisition costs must equal up to that per year. And that's U22. A U22 roster slot hits the cap only at $150,000 or $200,000, depending on the age. And so it's really easy to see how this opens the door for a U22 player to be signed this season. Now, St. Louis has all this flexibility, but what are the probabilities of St. Louis signing a U22 or a player of that kill to replace Rasmus Alm? If the rumors are any indication, St. Louis seems very willing to pursue U22s. Now, we don't have any new news from last week, but in case you weren't listening or you don't remember, St. Louis does seem to be in the market for somewhat of a U22 defender. The names that have been thrown around, either reported by local sources or reported by Tom Bogert: Michael Gergel, 19-year-old left-footed left back; Vojan Serafimovic, 19-year-old Serbian youth international left-footed center back; Teodoro Sebastian Ars, a 25-year-old right-footed Paraguayan winger; or Falou Fall, a 21-year-old left-footed center back, Senegalese U23, currently playing in Norway. Now, of those 4 players, again, none of them are new this week. These are the same ones we've been talking about last week. Of these 4, 2 seem to have some traction. Vojan Serafimovic, 19-year-old Serbian youth international left-footed center back. He is reported by Tom Bogert reporting in MLS. We all know Tom Bogert. He's reported by Tom Bogert that St. Louis City made an offer to his club, FK Kukariki. Now, St. Louis makes an offer. That still seems like it's in the early stages, but there is clear desire for Serafimovic. An offer being made is a good, tangible first step, and Tom Bogert is a very reputable source that you can believe in on that. The other big news, and since we talked last week, the only big news of note is that local reporting out of Norway is reporting that St. Louis City and Falun Fall have reached an agreement. Now, whether that's an agreement between the clubs or an agreement on personal terms yet, haven't gotten that depth. And we have heard that as of July 9th, Falun Fall was still in Norway. So there's a lot that still has to be developed on this, but the level of reporting leads us to believe that Falun Fall is the most likely candidate right now, or at least the furthest along to join City. And there's a lot of really interesting things that this brings with this potential transfer. So Falun Fall being a left-footed center back, 21 years old, the market value of this player on Transfermarkt is 2.8 million. Pretty hefty market value. The nuances to this are that Fall was just signed, and I'm talking just signed as of July 11th. His contract is going to be official with his club Fredrikstad in Norway for 500,000 euros. So that 500,000 euros, Falun Fall was on loan to Fredrikstad, and Fredrikstad had a purchase option, which they are reportedly going to pick up this week, right now. And so the big question with Falun Fall becomes value and overpayment. So as a 21-year-old left-footed center back, he does provide a clear need for St. Louis. We clearly want that profile of a player. But as Santiago Beltran will share, and he has asked me to express his strong feelings on this one, and kind of overall, I think all of us at Flyover share this kind of sentiment, is that if Falun Fall was signed and is being signed right now for 500,000 euros on signing his loan to purchase option, and now reportedly we are talking about St. Louis having signed or working to sign Falun Fall from Fredrikstad for $4 million. That seems a little crazy. That seems like a wild overpayment from 500,000 euros to $4 million. His market value is 2.8 million, so the value is clearly there, and it's arguable that Fredrikstad apparently got a deal, a steal of a deal in a lot of ways, to be able to sign this player, and he's under contract with them now through, I believe, 2028. So there's clear desire by Fredrikstad and clear potential that they see in him, but he seems to be jumping on a lot of people's radars really quickly recently in the past year. So my worry is that this seems like an overpayment possibility because we feel we need a player of his profile and we're not having the success elsewhere, or we're not landing a player. We're not having success in the market. And so knowing that we need to make a splash, we need to show that we're willing to spend money. This may be the way that we're doing it. And there's a lot of question marks about, is this the best way to spend a U22 slot? And on that note, looking across the league, like I said earlier, our two U22s right now are Jake Goodwood-Reich and Chris Durkin, a center defensive midfield and a defensive midfielder / center back. Only two teams across all of Major League Soccer currently use two of their U22 slots on defenders. So if you think of JGR as a center back right now, this would be Fall and JGR as U22 center backs and Durkin as a defensive midfielder. Those two teams, CF Montreal and Sporting KC. CF Montreal even has that exact combo of players, a midfielder and two defenders, as their profile for their three U22s. Now, I would argue that that is not the elite company of a roster build that we want to be a part of. CF Montreal and Sporting KC are bottom feeders in the league right now. Now, I know we are too, but that's not what we aspire to be. So there's concern that I have in the big picture of this move. Now, Falun Fall could end up being the signing of the century. You know, the potential could be there. I'm not arguing on his character, his profile, his capabilities. I'm just arguing on the overall how you construct a roster and whether and now that we're actually talking about spending potentially multi-million dollars, because this would break the transfer fee record for St. Louis. $4 million transfer fee is higher than what we paid for Klaus initially at a reported 3.5. So this would be a record signing for St. Louis. I'm just weary of using that in the center back slot when we have 22-year-old Michael Wenzel in the supplemental roster on a steal of a deal. We have Jake Goodwood-Reich, 21 years old, in that U22 slot. We also have Yaziel Orozco, 21-year-old center back who we just saw feature for St. Louis for the first time, who could potentially have a path ahead of him. So there are a lot of other players in the system right now when you're talking about finding a U22 type center back. It is debatable whether this is the best position to target for U22. And so that's why it seems like it may be an overpayment, a desperation move, because you need to make a splash. You see this as a point of need, and this may be your only way to get a player that you can sell as of the caliber of U22. We'll find out more about all of this in short time, I have no doubt, because July 24th is when the transfer window opens. Now, announcements and signings happen ahead of time. They just can't actually appear until the transfer window opens. And so you're seeing teams announce new signings all the time. You'll see and probably hopefully hear St. Louis announce something in the next few days, weeks leading up to that transfer window opening. That's just when they can first, come to the U.S., appear in training, and actually be signed pen to paper kind of a thing. Agreements happen beforehand, announcements happen beforehand. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's all we have on the transfer front. So let's pivot now to the actual preview. St. Louis City against the Portland Timbers. And I do believe this is our last Sunday night soccer matchup of the season, because it seems like we've played a ton of matches outside of that normal Saturday 7:30 p.m. window. This is one of our final ones. We have 7 home matches left, and this is the last one that will be outside of that Saturday evening time period, whether it's 7:30, 8, or whatever. Portland Timbers, St. Louis City SC, Sunday Night Soccer. These two teams have history too. St. Louis is 2-2-2, including a win by St. Louis in League's Cup last August against the Portland Timbers, with 11 goals scored, 10 goals against overall. But the big takeaway in these games is that they're always close. In all 5 MLS regular season matches so far, the draws have obviously been even, but the results otherwise have been 1-goal differences in each match. And that's a bit of a trend to Portland in some of their matches in the 2025 season, as we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes. But when it comes to predictions and projections, in my opinion, the one thing you can count on is that this is going to be a close game. Games between these two teams always seem to be ripe for a close contest, and I really don't see this one being any different. The last time these two teams played each other should be fairly familiar with every single St. Louis City fan. It was just about a month ago on June 8th. It was another Sunday night soccer match. It was at Providence Park in Portland, and it saw the Portland Timbers take it 2-1. That match had goals by Anthony and David Ayala for Portland and Akil Watts from St. Louis City. A match that saw both teams back in June with 18 shots, City with an 8-7 shot on target advantage, and St. Louis City winning the XG battle 2.57 to 1.72. The back line for St. Louis is probably going to be the biggest difference on the St. Louis side compared to that match. But Portland has their own differences that we're going to talk about here shortly. In that last match that allowed 1.72 XG for Portland and 2 goals against, it was Henry Kessler and Timo Baumgartel as our 2 center backs in that match. It was also David Critchley's second overall match as St. Louis City head coach and his first loss for the team under Critch. A lot of things that we remember fondly or not fondly against Portland, depending on how you want to look at it. But looking at Portland right now, where they come into this matchup this weekend in St. Louis at Energizer Park, they are 4th place in the Western Conference. They are a consistently good team, as we'll get to in a moment. In the West, 4th place, 9-5-6 record. That's 9 wins, 5 losses, 6 draws on 33 points in 20 matches. They have 30 goals scored, 28 goals allowed, and a +2 goal differential. Their last 3 matches were a 2-1 win against the New England Revolution, a 3-0 loss at Toronto, and a 1-1 draw against San Jose. Some trends in these last few games for Portland and throughout this season. It's notable that their only loss at home was week 1. So they've got a really good home record, but we'll see how they can translate that to away in St. Louis. 7 of their 9 wins this season have scored 2 goals. Their last 4 wins since May have all been won by just 1 goal. So this reinforces that very close game that I'm expecting and that Portland has really shown over the course of their recent history. They also have 5 total clean sheets out of 20. So they're not overly adept, middle of the pack in MLS on overall clean sheets, but they're no slouches in their clean sheets as well. Now, some of the biggest things to keep in mind for Portland are their health and availability. And it's not a massive list. I would expect Portland to have a pretty small list of the players out, but those players who are out are very key contributors. Portland announced, in fact, on July 8th, just this week, that forward Jonathan Rodriguez will miss the remainder of the year after undergoing successful cartilage restoration surgery on his right knee. Rodriguez notched 16 goals and 7 assists in 29 matches last year after joining the Timbers in March 2024 from Liga MX, but was just limited to 1 goal and 1 assist in 6 substitute appearances this year. He didn't feature against St. Louis, so if you're comparing what we saw against Portland versus what we can expect this weekend, Jonathan Rodriguez wasn't a factor then. He won't be one now. However, the biggest miss for Portland coming into St. Louis is Antony. You all probably remember Antony for his amazing move against Thomas Totland, incredible 1v1 work, really quality on the ball, and he scored a goal against St. Louis last time out. Antony leads their team with 6 goals and 7 assists, but he injured his hamstring against the San Jose Earthquake on June 13th, and at that time, he was said to be missing 6 to 8 weeks. Phil Neville said this week that Antony might return at the end of July, but he will miss this match. A huge blow for the Portland Timbers attack. Probably a bit of a welcome absence for St. Louis fans, as Antony was that one player who I think we could all point to for extended periods of time, performing extremely well on the ball, probably one of their most, if not the most dangerous player in their attacking third, and incredible individual moments like that goal that I mentioned and the way he was able to win the ball around Thomas Totland in that wide area. Seared into my brain, I know, and probably into yours as well. The only other big injury, or rather consideration, was Maxime Crepeau, their goalkeeper, who was dealing with a lower body injury, but I do believe he's been cleared to play. The last time out, Portland had some players missing due to international duty, but they've all returned. So it's basically Jonathan Rodriguez continuing to be out, but Portland has kind of adapted to playing without him. He may be done in Portland in general, and then Antony as their biggest loss. Some other storylines that I'm following for the Portland Timbers are Phil Neville in his second season with Portland is 24, 19, and 17 in 60 matches over those 2 seasons, and he's just produced a consistently good Portland Timbers team. They've not lost 2 matches in MLS in a row all season, and have had 1 7-match unbeaten streak with another 4-match unbeaten streak, and then most recently a 3-match unbeaten streak. All of that happening in just 20 games. So a streaky team, but streaky in a good way for the Portland Timbers. They still have a strong and dynamic attack without Rodriguez, but the big question is going to be, how do they look without Antony? And can they actually make a goal-scoring push without Antony? Some of their recent matches, like I mentioned, that 3-0 loss against Toronto, the 2-1 win against the Rebs, they haven't been lighting up the scoreboard with goals without Antony. And so St. Louis does have an opportunity here to really take advantage of this team without Antony. But that doesn't mean they're without goal-scoring prowess. David DaCosta, an MLS All-Star DP midfielder who leads the team in assists with 8 and has 3 goals of his own, is their creative midfielder. He is their answer to Evander having departed last season. And he provides that creativity in the midfield that a lot of St. Louis fans wish we had, but you can kind of liken him to Marcel Hartl in how he's been utilized by Portland just in their flow of play. Ian Smith is also notable, number 23 on their team, left midfielder. He was named with David DaCosta to the bench of the team of the match day this past weekend after scoring the opening goal on a banger of a shot from the far side. And I mention this because this goal that he scored last weekend is one of those quintessential goals that St. Louis seems to allow rather often. A goal where everybody on the defense from Portland was collapsing, or from the Rebs were collapsing towards goal. And then it was Ian Smith came kind of out of nowhere into the box on the left side and gave a banger of a shot that just went right past the Revs keeper. This noteworthy just because, like I said, this is kind of a goal where St. Louis has been known to allow. So the Portland throwing numbers into the box in that way, in transition, something St. Louis has to watch out for from a guy like Ian Smith. Other notable attackers for Portland include Kevin Kelsey, who has 6 goals on the season. He's a physical, tall. I think he's 6'4" in the attacking third. So he's a big body that St. Louis is going to make sure they have to manage in that final third, whether it's on aerial duels, on crosses, or just a target in the box. Felipe Mora, 5 goals. He's got a high work rate in the attack. Santiago Moreno, 4 goals on the season. Creativity and dynamism to the attack. Diego Chara, probably the last big player that I want to address. Veteran leader in the defensive midfield. A lot of us know the name Diego Chara. He's still chugging along. One of the smartest and probably most respected 6s in the league to help manage the flow of the game for Portland. Now, on the St. Louis side, we know that we're 14th in the West. We know it's been a bad season so far, a 3-12-6 record on 15 points in 21 matches, which is less than half the points that the Portland Timbers have in one additional match. 21 goals scored compared to Portland's 30, 34 goals allowed, which equals a minus 13 goal differential for St. Louis. We are 1-4-1 under David Critchley. So after that first start against the San Jose Earthquake, things have kind of fallen off the rails in our ability to manage a game. The last few, we had a loss to the Houston Dynamo 1-0 last weekend, a 4-2 loss at home against Orlando midweek prior, and a 3-3 draw against the Galaxy on June 14th, week and a half before that. So not a great stretch from St. Louis, looking to find some consistency going forward. Some trends recently for St. Louis. Now only 3 points ahead of the LA Galaxy and 1 point ahead of CF Montreal in the battle for the wooden spoon, you could say, or the battle to get away from the wooden spoon, which is the award, an actual award that's given out for the worst placed team in the Supporter Shield, the lowest points in the entire season. 4 of our 7 highest XG matches have been in Critchley's first 4, but his 5th match was our second worst offensive performance, and we haven't been able to replicate consistently those first few offensive matches. Defensively, 4 of Critchley's 5 matches have allowed 1.7 XG or higher. It's just not been good. We haven't been able to find the balance in being defensively stout in transition and in possession, but also making sure that we're getting the ball into the final third, progressively passing, progressively carrying in consistent enough times, and then actually finishing our goals. Our XG really hasn't been that bad consistently over the course of Critchley's tenure. Yeah, that's still something he can hang his hat on, as he's turned it around offensively, but we're still not able to find the answers defensively to make sure that we're not losing leads that we get early, but also that we're able to come back quickly if we do allow a goal. The problems St. Louis has had over the course of the season, and this is extended into David Critchley's tenure, is conceding goals first. St. Louis is 0-9-0 with 9 losses when conceding first this season. That is a big problem. That it doesn't necessarily indicate an inability to come back, but it definitely does indicate an inability to consistently come back. They've come back in games to draw, but then they've re-lost the lead. So they can't get over that hump. And that's something that I think mentally St. Louis has to improve upon. And they also just have to shore up the first 10, 15, 20 minutes of game. Conceding 6 minutes. Now, I know last week was a worldie of a goal, but conceding 6 minutes in just cannot keep happening. This is something St. Louis has to mentally focus on, mentally prepare for, because we do not want to see it be a trend over more than the past 2 games that it has been, of St. Louis saying, we had a good game plan going in. We were confident about our game plan, but then we got knocked on our teeth. We didn't come out strong. We don't know what happened. That cannot be a trend that continues, and it's starting to be worrisome after the last couple of games, even though all of the St. Louis City players, including Tomas Ostrak that I talked to this week, are still very positive about the overall direction of this club. The locker room vibes are still high, they say. The feeling in training is good. Critchley even said this past week in training was the best one yet. He referred to Wednesday of this week in training as the best single day in training that he's had in his 6 weeks since taking over the job at St. Louis City. So there's things to build off of. It's almost like they have to have a goldfish mentality. Forget what happened before, focus on training this week and getting better the next week. Now, if there is one thing to hang their hat on, it's set piece goals. St. Louis has 9 goals scored from set pieces after both Klaus and Yaziel Orozco, or rather Klaus and Josh Yarrow scored a goal last week. I think it was credited to Josh Yarrow. At one point it was given as an own goal. One point it was Orozco. Either way, set pieces are being productive, which is a welcome change in the storyline of Marcel Hartl being, at least recently, talked about as a little weaker in set pieces. And I will take full responsibility for part of that narrative, because he takes a lot of set pieces. St. Louis generates a ton of set piece opportunities. And so one of the things I think this is just when you generate so many set piece opportunities, whether they're corner kicks or they're free kicks in the run of play, and you don't capitalize on maybe any but 10%, even though you're generating a high volume of that, perception is skewed a little bit in what that seems like. So overall, compared to MLS teams, St. Louis is among the highest in goals from set pieces. So that is something to consider and remember going into this. If you're seeing players try to earn corner kicks, draw fouls, is that this has been successful, proven, data-driven success over the course of the season that St. Louis is clearly going to try to replicate. Now we turn to the health and availability of St. Louis, and I am not going to spend as much time this week as I did last week on this. We know the story with a lot of these players. We can confirm that the list of players that should be out. And a reminder, I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon, evening, and we have a Friday press conference ahead of us. So if you're listening to this on the Big 550 KTRS on Sunday ahead of the match, just keep that in mind. Double check our socials for the latest. But expect Timo Baumgartel, Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson, Alfredo Morales, and Chris Durkin to be out. Durkin is the only one who is a possible question mark on that, but Baumgartel, Kessler, Nilsson, and Morales are not going to be appearing. Rasmus Alm, I already mentioned, season-ending injury, so we're probably not going to include him on the list going forward since he's off roster now. Edu Löwen, though, is the good point here. Edu Löwen trained this week with St. Louis City, and Critchley doesn't know if he's going to be 90 minutes fit. Probably a little too optimistic to say Löwen's 90 minutes fit, but the big question is, will he be 45 minutes fit? Because if Edu Löwen is at least 45 minutes fit, Critchley really hinted that he could start. And so it will be a probably game time decision, end of the week training type decision on how he's progressed after his own hamstring injury to see whether he'll be a candidate to start. If he can go at least 45, he should start. If not, expect to see Edu Löwen later in the game. You may see a midfield combo of Tomas Ostrak and Konrad Wallem again as a result. But this is good news no matter what. And David Critchley alluded to that midweek during his comments to the media, saying that it's specifically a benefit to having Löwen in what he offers, not just to himself and in the middle of the field, but elsewhere on the field. It allows us to push Marcel Hartl higher and keep him higher. If we can count on Löwen's quality on the ball in progression to cross the ball up, to get the ball aerially high, and to have that vision to direct the ball where it needs to go from the pivot location, then we can allow Marcel Hartl to continue being more involved in the attacking third. And that's a benefit to everyone because Hartl was his most successful for St. Louis last season when he was more unlocked in the final third. Yes, it was on the left side primarily, but my biggest takeaway is Hartl is the most successful when he's in that attacking third or attacking half more consistently, not being asked to do too much. So besides Edu Löwen being the good news, players that we had been tracking, Tomas Ostrak, Konrad Wallem, and Michael Wenzel, they all seem good to go. They were full participants in training. So fitness from those injuries or not yet being able to go a full 90 is the only limiting factor for guys like Tomas Ostrak, Konrad Wallem, and Michael Wenzel. Now, we know the injuries of that big storyline. We have Löwen returning. For me, the other big storyline for St. Louis is we're sitting here in the early to middle part of July, and we are all double-digit points out of the playoff hunt already. There's a lot of talk that the playoffs are out of reach. The fan base is absolutely justifiably turning into that mindset. And so it's not just on the team to prove them wrong, but you also have to start thinking long-term. And is this the time to start playing the kids a little bit more? And so I'll touch on that a little bit later, but the big question for me, the one kid, quote unquote, to play is 18-year-old Makai Joyner. He has one more short-term loan appearance available as an off-roster homegrown. He's been rostered in 6 games, but only appeared in 5. And the rules for this roster designation state an off-roster homegrown player may appear as a short-term call-up in up to 6 MLS league season matches per season. Now, the appearance in that match is the big key to remember. He's been rostered on 6 rosters, but he should have one more appearance left. Now, as the playoffs get further out of reach, this call becomes a little louder each time. We're not mathematically eliminated, but you want to see more Joyner. You enjoyed seeing Pierce come in at central midfield last week. You enjoyed seeing Yaziel Orozco, another 21-year-old player, coming in to start and perform well. And on that note for Orozco, Critchley had a lot of positive things to say about Yaziel Orozco. So much so that he said if he continues training and playing as he has been so far, he'll be a candidate to start this weekend at any backline position. So there's a lot of positivity around Yaziel Orozco, as well as Makai Joyner and Tyson Pierce. So big question is, how is Critchley going to manage this from a specific game, trying to win perspective, but also in context of the bigger season and what they need to do for some of these players going forward. You're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank you so much for joining me, Matt Baker, as I preview the Portland Timbers St. Louis City matchup on Sunday Night Soccer. Now let's dive in just a little bit more into both teams and what they have to offer, especially this Portland side, because we know the issues that St. Louis has had. One of the only, if the biggest, but maybe only strength St. Louis has is shots from direct free kicks. Other than that, St. Louis has massive issues in defending set pieces, protecting the lead, keeping possession of the ball, finishing scoring chances, a lot of those big things that impact games. On Portland's side of the fence, they are good at shooting from direct free kicks. So fouling Portland is coming at your own peril. They are really strong at aerial duels with, like I said, Kelsey as their 6'4" forward. They have some tall center backs too, I believe. They're not great, though, at defending against individual skillful players. So a Marcel Hartl, I hope, if Löwen can go, is unlocked a little bit more, and he can dictate a lot of the play around Portland. Stopping opponents from creating chances. Portland allows a lot of shots, as we saw in our previous game against them, 18 shots that we were able to get off. Defending counterattacks, Portland is fairly weak in. So if St. Louis can get their pressing triggers right, if they can initiate the counterattacks, they may be in good position to generate some really high XG opportunities. And then it just gets down to the question of, can we finish some of these opportunities? Avoiding fouling in dangerous areas. Portland is a little aggressive in fouling and in teams able to draw fouls from Portland. So that's definitely an advantage that St. Louis could have. When we look at how Portland is going to come out, a 4-2-3-1 is probably likely. Expect Portland to utilize pacey wingers, a physical forward. They're going to complement the creativity of David DaCosta a whole lot in the midfield. The Timbers really do like width in their attack. They've gone to 3 or 5 in the back to start a game 5 of their 20 matches, but more often than not, they do like this 4-2-3-1. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach St. Louis. And like I said, Kevin Kelsey, 6'4", poses the biggest threat in crosses and aerial duels. So with both Kessler and Baumgartel out, if you're looking about your starting 11, this would be a knock against Orozco in a center back role to start this match because he's shorter than 5'10", I believe. And so you have Michael Wenzel and JGR available potentially as your center back duo that provides height to help in this. So that's a strong possibility in my eyes. Looking at how these two teams stack up, though, Portland has scored 30 goals. St. Louis has scored 21. But St. Louis is outproducing Portland in the NPXG, the non-penalty expected goals, 26.2 to 22.5. Now, if you average that out for the extra game St. Louis has played, that's 1.25 versus 1.12 per 90. So St. Louis still has the advantage, albeit slightly, in producing goal opportunities and XG in the run of play, the non-penalty. Also, St. Louis with their high amount of goals scored and opportunities on set pieces, big benefit for St. Louis in that number as well. So with St. Louis underperforming when it comes to finishing, they're creating better in comparison to Portland. Now, how do these two teams progress the ball? Well, average possession, Portland does average greater than 50% possession. St. Louis averages 45.1% possession. That's 12th versus 27th in the league in terms of overall average possession. Portland significantly higher. So as we go into the field tilt, which is determined by passes into and within the final third, a number David Critchley has put emphasis on winning that battle, which really goes to how much you can control the ball in the final third of your opponent. The last 5 matches, it doesn't indicate a good number for St. Louis. Portland's last 4, 54%, 52%, 72%, and 75% field tilt in their last 4 games. And I stop at that last 4th because their 4th game ago was against St. Louis. So that 75% field tilt was against St. Louis. St. Louis has been getting better since that game, but their last 5, 54%, 32, 43, 53, 25. So a lot of inconsistency in St. Louis's ability to control the game in the final third, not just sending the ball into the final third consistently, but maintaining possession in the final third, doing something, being creative, whether it's passes into, carries into, passes within the final third. All of these things impact the field tilt in a way that St. Louis just hasn't found consistency where Portland has. That may be the biggest thing to watch, and the biggest frustration that St. Louis could run into at home at Energizer Park is the amount of time that the ball seems like it's primed to spend in St. Louis's defensive third, just by sheer historical value of what Portland has been able to do here. Now, how are they able to get the ball into the final third, or how are they able to progress it? Well, when you look at progressive carries, which are carries of greater than 10 yards forward, or really any carry into the penalty box, Portland has 347 of these versus St. Louis's 297, which equals 17.4 versus 14.1 per 90. That makes Portland a top 5 team in Major League Soccer in progressive carries, St. Louis a bottom 7. So it might not seem like there's a massive difference in 17.4 versus 14.1 per 90, but if you're talking about 3 extra carries into the box or 3 extra carries per game of greater than 10 yards, that moves the needle. That's good for 1, 2, or 3 more additional chances than St. Louis has. Progressive passing it's not quite as egregious. You have these are passes of greater than 10 yards, or passes forward, that is, or passes into the penalty area. Portland has 785. St. Louis has 659. That's 39.3 for Portland per 90, 31.4 per 90 for St. Louis. Portland is middling, 15th in MLS, and St. Louis is 28th out of 30 teams. So again, St. Louis not good at progressing the ball vertically compared to other MLS teams, either carrying or passing. But if you're looking at one way in which Portland will be trying to control this game and progress the ball forward, you're more likely to see it via carries. You're more likely to see individual players taking space, not the long passes from Portland. You'll see it here and there, but one of Portland's bread and butters is their ability to carry the ball forward, get the ball into the creative feet of a guy like Diego Chara or David Acosta, and let them move the ball forward consistently. They're going to do it a lot. So closing those gaps, taking space away from the ball carrier, not just taking away passing lanes, that's going to be a big key for St. Louis. And something I'm going to watch for is how often does St. Louis try to cut off passing lanes versus how often is St. Louis going to be initiating duels or initiating challenges to prevent a ball handler from taking that space and force them to make passes. That seems like a game plan St. Louis should be looking towards. Some of the other questions that I have for St. Louis going into this matchup: is it time to lean into playing the kids? And I mentioned Mekhi Joyner earlier, but is there a downside that will hurt their growth by doing so now, as the season is continuing to slip away a little bit, where we're getting into this winless streak again? Do you shuffle some of these kids into the starting 11? And I don't mean to use kids in a derogatory way, but obviously teenagers are at play here. Do you end the off-roster designation for guys like Tyson Pierce and Mekhi Joyner coming up? Mekhi Joyner has one more appearance left, and then you're going to have to actually ask that question. So it's just a forecasting question. But part of this is just, what does playing the kids look like? Does it look like last week, where you brought all three of them, Joyner, Pierce, to start, but you bring in Pierce and Joyner in the second half? Does it look like starting one of them and bringing the other two in? Because then you start to turn the tides a little bit of your starting 11 into infusing it with youth and, I would say, inexperience at the MLS level. That's the biggest question mark for me, is how do you balance that? And you still have some players on the roster who I would say haven't gotten a significant amount enough playing time to really evaluate what all they have to offer that aren't kids. Thinking namely of Jean de Silva, a 28-year-old who at one point for Atlanta United was a multi-million-dollar transfer target. He hasn't started in his natural position yet at left wing in MLS play for St. Louis. So in addition to playing the kids, do you have that opportunity? Will Jean de Silva ever find his way into the starting 11 on that left side? Celio Pompeu does not appear to have cemented himself as an every match starter. There is no doubt that he is one of, if not the most exciting players when he has control of the ball. He just hasn't found himself as that no-brainer starter on the left side or in general as a striker. And so how do you manage that left side knowing that Joyner can play that as well? The one other, I would say, uncomfortable or concerning, maybe just question mark surrounding Celio Pompeu is, will he be a transfer target of any team inside or outside of MLS in this transfer window? And I say that with a little bit of data to back this up. There was an article that came out from a foreign source that had an interview with Celio this week, where he reported interest in teams reaching out to his agent and said that nothing is there right now. It's not the right move right now, but it's something to keep in mind for Celio. Whether or not he sees more playing time or his playing time dwindles, it does seem to be that some teams across the globe are interested in Celio Pompeu. Probably shouldn't come as a surprise, but I don't think that's been talked about a ton. So that's a storyline that I'm following as well, that in the sense of, will he see dwindling playing time if his future in St. Louis is in doubt? That's where it impacts this game. And on the story of other players that we would consider top quality for St. Louis not starting potentially, what's going on with Cedric Teuchert? Huge storyline for me is Cedric Teuchert's inability to find space, his inability to find proper passing, being successful in some of his passing, as well as finding goal. Cedric Teuchert of 2025 has not been the Cedric Teuchert of 2024, no matter how you slice it, even with 3 goals. The consistency has not been there, and for a player who we've relied upon as our Nico Gioacchini replacement from way back, he has not been producing in 2025. And what is the cause of that? Is it the system? Is it the player? Is it the form? Is it the combination of where he is on the field and who he's playing with? Something's wrong, and we need to figure out how to get him going. or you have to keep him off the 11 if the form's not there and you have guys ready to take his spot, or guys like John Da Silva that I mentioned that need an opportunity if you're going to give him one. The last question is just, how does St. Louis City shore up their defense? And will this finally be the match they do so under Critchley, balancing out the attack with the defense that we've seen struggle so badly? Does this come into availability being an issue? And is the answer Yasiel Orozco on the back line? Do you continue to give him left back minutes if you're seeing Jay Reed struggle a little bit? How does that battle look? Is this the time to move Yasiel Orozco into the center back role? Does the height issue with Portland preclude you from doing that? A lot of questions in this puzzle that David Critchley has to answer. And it's somewhat of an exciting match going into Sunday because of all these nuances, all of these questions that are up in the air, even with the poor form that this team has been in. So with that, we look at what does the starting 11 look like for St. Louis. My predicted starting 11, and I've got Santiago's and I've got Stu's that I'll read here in a minute. My predicted starting 11 is Roman Berkey at net, Yasiel Orozco at left back, Michael Wenzel and JGR as your center backs, Thomas Totland as your right back, Edu Löwen and Conrad Wallem as your central midfielders, Mackay Joyner, Marcel Hartl, Simon Betcher, and Klaus as your attackers. Joyner on the left, Hartl centrally, Betcher on the right, at least in rest defense, and Klaus up top. Now, because of this difference in my 11, I thought it'd be fun to look at who would be on the bench if this happened. And my bench, 9 players on the bench, would be Celio Pompeu, John Da Silva, Cedric Toyshirt, Akil Watts, Joey Zielinski, Ben Lunt, Tyson Pierce, Kyle Hebert, and Jay Reed. That's leaving Josh Yarrow off entirely. I would once again call up Tyson Pierce because he was in training again this week, along with Yasiel Orozco, along with Mackay Joyner, along with Seth Antwi. Seth Antwi is kind of out on the outskirts. He's in his mid-20s, so he's not a kid necessarily, but he's clearly proven enough at City too. And so he's in the background of my questions. Will he get a short-term call-up, maybe in lieu of Tyson Pierce? Is this a case where you're willing to burn a few short-term call-ups for Tyson Pierce in a row because he has a couple more than Seth Antwi, Pierce being an off-roster homegrown that I talked about earlier, having 6 appearances versus Antwi as a City 2 player who has 4 and 2 MLS League appearances possible. So these all play into the puzzle that David Critchley has to deal with. But Santi's starting 11 looks pretty similar to mine, with Yasiel Orozco at left back, Michael Wenzel and JGR center backs, Thomas Totland at right back, Edu Löwen and Tomas Ostrak at your center mids, Celio on the left side, Hartl centrally, Conrad Wallem on the right side, and then Klaus up top. Stuart Holmgren's 11, both of them have Berkey and net. Stuart Holmgren's is Jay Reed at left back, JGR and Michael Wenzel at center back, Thomas Totland at right back, Conrad Wallem and Tomas Ostrak at center mids, Mackay Joyner left mid, Marcel Hartl is your central attacking midfielder, Simon Betcher on the right side, and Klaus up top. Now that's a lot, okay? So some consensus thoughts to get you as takeaways to this. If Michael Wenzel is healthy, a lot of us would rather see him with JGR than see Kyle Hebert or Josh Yarrow back in this lineup at this moment in time. When you're talking about playing the kids, Michael Wenzel is a part of that. And we didn't see anything from Michael Wenzel. He should come out, or last time he started, he should come out. It's just his injury that was kind of taking him out for a period of time. Definitely not Josh Yarrow, I would say. We've seen enough of Josh Yarrow in transition last week. It really hurt. The other thing, if Edu Löwen is healthy enough for 45, he's obviously a lock. The differences in our central midfields were just that optimism versus pessimism versus realism of if he's healthy enough to go 45. If he is, he's obviously in. Some other takeaways are Mackay Joyner starting versus being a sub option. And for his 6th and final appearance on that off-roster homegrown, I want to see him in the roster. For Conrad Wallem, it's either Conrad Wallem, mine, it was in the central midfield. With Santi's, it was at the right mid, and with Stu, is central midfield. Conrad Wallem's still a valuable player, maybe one of our more valuable ball handlers. We'd like to see him in the lineup no matter what. Tomas Ostrak is right there in the central midfield, especially if Löwen can't go. And then Hartl in the middle, Klaus up top, differences on the wings. I'm interested in what you guys think. If you're listening to this on the Big 550 KTRS, reply to Flyover Footy. Let us know what your lineup is because our consensus will be out. Otherwise, The scoring odds on this one, Vegas has us favored a little bit as the home team, probably due to Anthony's injury, but a plus 120 for St. Louis, a plus 270 for the draw, and a plus 210 for Portland to win. My score prediction on this one, I've got a 3-2 win for St. Louis. Close game. I would love to be optimistic about St. Louis opening it up a little bit and scoring goals. This seems to be like a little bit of a marriage of the balance. You have a strong attack from St. Louis, but you're not super strong defensively. The key is going to be scoring first. I'm still not confident in this team being able to come from behind and score a goal. So I want to see him off on the right foot to begin with. And at home on Sunday night, this is going to be absolutely vital. Probably the most key thing in the game that I could say is St. Louis has to score first. That's it for me on Flyover Footy, previewing the Portland Timbers against our St. Louis City SC. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have subscribed and if you're liking all of our stuff, we really appreciate that. If not, tell your friends, because we are always on this at training, giving updates. And the way you can help us out, it's not by paying for our stuff. We don't have paid content, but like and subscribe, leave a comment or a review. 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is the way to help us out. Thank you so much. We love delivering all of this for you. Good luck to St. Louis City SC and enjoy this match on Sunday Night Soccer, our last one of the season. And as always, go City.